Business where stars often behave like demanding children, a place where Harvey Weinstein was long considered a moral leader, Matt Damon stands out. He's apparently well-liked by just about everybody he deals with. He gives generously to charity. He's been married to the same woman for 12 years. They're raising 4 daughters. No one's ever even accused him of sexual misconduct, but suddenly that doesn't matter. Matt Damon's career is now in jeopardy. More than 20,000 people have signed a petition calling for producers to cut Damon from his latest film. That movie's already been shot, but the petition demands that any evidence of his voice or image be removed from the film in the editing booth. Other people are saying Damon ought to be denied future film roles, and he may well be denied those roles. What exactly did Matt Damon do to so thoroughly destroy his reputation in such short a time? Well, last week, he gave an interview to ABC News about the wave of sex scandals in Hollywood. No, he didn't defend sexual harassment in that interview. He didn't suggest the accusers are lying. He didn't say anything remotely like that, though you'd never know it from the coverage, which in some cases omits any of Damon's direct quotes. So we'll let you decide for yourself what you think of Matt Damon's views. Here's what he actually said to ABC News.
I do believe that there's a spectrum of behavior, right? And we're going to have to figure out, like, what, you know, there's a difference between, you know, patting someone on the butt and rape or child molestation, right? Both of those behaviors need to be confronted and eradicated without question, but they shouldn't be conflated.
Damon went on to say this: we live in this culture of outrage and injury, and we're going to have to correct enough to go, wait a minute, none of us came here perfect. We're in this moment, we're at the moment, and I hope it doesn't stay this way. The clearer signal to men and to younger people is deny it, because if you take responsibility for what you did, your life's going to get ruined. All of that behavior needs to be confronted, but there is a continuum. And on this end of the continuum, where you have rape and child molestation or whatever, you know, that's prison. That's criminal behavior, and it needs to be dealt with that way. The other stuff is kind of shameful and gross. I don't know Louis C.K. I've never met him. I'm a fan of his, but I don't imagine he's going to do those things again. You know what I mean? I imagine the price that he has paid at this point is so beyond anything that I just think we have to start delineating between what these behaviors are. End quote. There it is. Now, there are a couple of incomplete thoughts in there. There's a line or two your average publicist would advise you against expressing in public. But ask yourself, and be honest, how much of that do you actually disagree with? How much is hateful or immoral or otherwise beyond the pale? None of it? Exactly. There's not a single sentiment in that entire paragraph that's not defensible, or that 90% of the American population would find over the top or outrageous. It's all within bounds, or it would have been last year. But because a handful of Twitter users don't like it, the rest of us have to pretend that Matt Damon is somehow guilty of something awful. And if we don't pretend, we may ourselves be seen as collaborators of whatever crimes he supposedly committed and forced to share his punishment. It's terrifying and it's corrupting. This is how reason dies. We're watching it happen. Most of us are too afraid to say anything about it as it happens. Meanwhile, the least reasonable, most extreme voices get louder by the hour. Yesterday, actress Rose McGowan ordered the media to stop using the word alleged when describing claims of sexual misconduct. In other words, everyone accused is guilty. If you deny that, you're guilty too. Weirdly, almost nobody in the media pushed back against Rose McGowan's demand. Before long, they may have to obey her. She has nearly 1 million Twitter followers. She's calling the shots. Let's just be honest about what's happening. Social media are driving this insanity. They're making mob justice the rule and clear thinking impossible. Large portions of our population, and ironically, they tend to be the best educated portions of the population, are now addicted to outrage, virtue signaling, bandwagoning. Social media did that. It turns out it's not that helpful to know what every famous person in America is thinking at all times. It just makes us all crazy and less content. A few weeks ago, former Facebook president Sean Parker admitted that the website he helped found, Facebook, quote, literally changes your relationship with society and with each other. Parker was right. It is all shredding our social fabric before our eyes. Remember, you have an absolute right to say what you think is true. Other people might not agree with you, but that's okay. It doesn't make either of you evil or mean you ought to be fired from your job. It just means you disagree. That has always been true. It was true before smartphones, and no matter what they say on Twitter, it's true now. Joining us now, radio show host Tammy Bruce. So, Tammy, I never thought that I would defend Matt Damon, and I'm not actually really defending Matt Damon. I'm just defending the proposition that you can say something that other people disagree with without being fired for it. And we seem to have lost that.
Yeah, indeed. Look, I also loathe him. He's said some things about the president and about others, which politically I very much disagree with. I don't know him, but he seems to me to be like the blind squirrel here. Every now and then you find a nut, and he's found one because he's right. And you're absolutely right in your assessment leading into this. But as a feminist, here's also what I see in this regard. And I've been arguing from the beginning here that we need to be careful, as I saw the attempt to conflate guys being jerks with guys who are actual predators. Yeah. And the women involved in this and the people on the left argue that, well, we don't want him and others to trivialize these serious allegations. But you know what really trivializes them, Tucker, is when you do compare a man, let's say, calling you beautiful as you walk down the hallway, or maybe rubbing your back, with an act of rape. That trivializes those survivors, what they've been through. And I think that, as most people understand that, as we listened to, as you read what Matt Damon said, and this is now our challenge, because this is what the left always does. They use a serious issue that people, we know it has to be dealt with, and then write it, and then abuse it. They go too far. It's like the French Revolution. The people begin to do things simply because they can, and they use it for revenge or because they can't stop their rage, and then everybody's going to have to pay. Jodie Foster, I think, said, I saw a headline the other day, that every man over the age of 30 is somewhat culpable for the sexual harassment we now face. I have found in my life it's been men who have been most helpful and the most decent to me, with women not necessarily being so. So this is an issue of behavior. It's not an issue about men or sex, even, as we know. It's about control. And I think that unless we get a handle on this and have an honest conversation, you're going to have the left once again shredding an important issue like sexual harassment and sexual assault, because they don't know, they have no boundary of what's important, and then conflating everything and then just simply vomiting their rage out on everyone.
Exactly. And it diminishes the experience of people who really have suffered. I mean, if you lost your legs in an IED and I closed my hand in a car door, and I say to you, we both kind of suffered in the same way, you would say, no, actually, I have my legs blown off. You broke a finger. They're not the same. Yeah. And look, there are different things in the workplace and the seriousness. Workplaces clearly are dealing with that. But we do have to be careful with single voices who have perhaps originally some very important things to say. Right. And then something changes in that framework, because they should not be conflated. These things are different. There is a continuum, and certain voices, hopefully voices like ours, will remind people of these things and make sure that we don't have a wholesale, effectively a beheading of everyone who the left doesn't like or that feminists don't like, because then we're all going to lose. That's exactly right. Let reasonable people speak. Tammy, you are a reasonable person. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for doing that. Appreciate it. Mark, I feel, well, actually so intimidated that I have to say out loud what is obvious, which is I think sexual harassment is abhorrent, obviously, and I think people guilty of it should be punished for it. But I'm starting to be concerned that innocent people are afraid of being hurt, and that's a bad sign. And so the question is, what are the rules? How do we find out what they are? How do you know if you're guilty? What is going on?
Well, realistically, there are no rules. I mean, just to connect it up with the first half of the show, the only serious likelihood of ever getting rid of Bob Mueller and shutting down his investigation, for example, would be if a stenographer said that he'd hugged her inappropriately in 1977. Boom, he'd be gone. He'd be history. He'd be toast. He'd be like these PBS and NPR guys who've had basically 50-year careers vaporized in 24 hours. And what has happened, I think, is what often happens, is the end of any kind of proportion. This started with Harvey Weinstein, who has been credibly accused by actresses on at least 3 continents of rape or brutal sexual assault. And there are names, and there are dates, and there are places backing up those accusations. As I said, actresses from New Zealand, from France, from the United Kingdom, the United States, Canada, all over the map with names. Suddenly, that has morphed into a general accusation by someone you don't know is enough to end your career. Garrison Keillor, for example, I don't care for Garrison Keillor any more than you care for Tavis Smiley. I met him, he was on my BBC show 25 years ago, and he was a cold fish and deeply unpleasant. But I feel about him the way you feel about Tavis Smiley. If he's going to just be vaporized and have his life's work wiped out, at the very least, we should know what he did and who he did it to.
So why is nobody saying that?
Well, I think there's a general agreement on the left, and this has been essentially driven by left-wing dominated industries, that they're now weaponizing sex the way they've weaponized race. That it's a useful, that they've concluded it's a useful weapon to them, and that necessarily means a kind of clearing out the decks. I mean, I'm astonished, you know, on the vast empty plains of the PBS and NPR schedules, you can actually hunt buffalo there. All the septuagenarian hosts have been gone, just gone in moments. And it's absolutely astonishing to me, and it will in the end make social relations impossible. You must think, as I think occasionally, do I really want to be alone with a female employee now?
I think that all the time.
Who knows how she's going to feel about it in 30 years' time? I mean, I don't think that's necessarily in the interests of women in the workplace. I don't think it's in the interests of social relations. It's an insane moral panic that started with genuine rape, genuine violence, genuine power issues, and now just seems to have degenerated into one anonymous accusation can end a career.
So I wonder why, I mean, again, I think it's always valuable and virtuous to make sure the guilty are punished. That's what justice is. But I also think that journalists play a role in this, and that they ought to be the responsible parties in these stories. And maybe somebody should pull back a little bit and make certain that the allegations are true and that the process is transparent before destroying people's careers and reputations. But they're not doing that.
Well, I think one reason they're not doing that is because essentially it's their business that is being clobbered. Basically, TV and motion pictures are two of the most desirable businesses to be in. There are far more attractive women wanting to work in those industries than in any other industries on the planet. I live in far northern New Hampshire, and the local feed store does not have a casting couch, because if you said to a comely young lady, you know, there could be a really good job as night clerk here if you play your cards right, she'd laugh in your face and go off and do something else. But there's no, but in television and in motion pictures, there is the supply far outpaces demand.
No, that's absolutely true. No, it is a perfect environment for misdeeds like this. It's just that
that's right.
Not everyone accused is guilty. Mark